The story of T.D. Jakes begins not just with sermons, but with scale. Rising from the landscape of Dallas, the Potter's House stands as a striking symbol of ambition. Glass, steel, and intention, shaped into a sanctuary designed to hold thousands. With sweeping tiers of seating and space for multiple services, it was never meant to be ordinary. At its height, the church pulsed with energy as tens of thousands gathered weekly, drawn by a message that blended faith, resilience, and personal transformation. The building itself seemed to promise permanence, as if it could outlast changing times and shifting cultures. But beyond the architecture was something more powerful, a movement anchored in one man's voice. People didn't just come for the space, they came for the certainty, the inspiration, and the belief that they were part of something historic. It felt, to many, like witnessing a legacy in real time, from pastor to national figure. By the early 2000s, T.D. Jakes had moved far beyond the pulpit into the national spotlight. When Time magazine featured him on its cover, it marked a turning point. He was no longer just a pastor, but a cultural figure. Comparisons to Billy Graham began to surface, placing him in a lineage of influential religious leaders. Public figures sought his counsel, and his influence reached into politics, entertainment, and media. Conversations with leaders and friendships with figures like Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry reinforced his presence across industries. His message resonated beyond church walls, touching audiences who might never have stepped into a sanctuary. This visibility helped redefine what a modern pastor could be, someone equally at home in spiritual guidance and mainstream culture. For many followers, his rise felt inspiring, even symbolic of broader possibilities for leadership and influence within faith communities. Building more than a ministry behind the sermons, a complex organization was taking shape. What began as a church gradually expanded into a multifaceted enterprise, often referred to as the T.D. Jakes Group. It extended into publishing, film, conferences, and real estate, areas not traditionally associated with ministry but increasingly common in modern religious leadership. Books became bestsellers, events filled arenas, and partnerships with major studios opened new creative doors. Supporters saw this as innovation, a way to spread messages of hope across platforms. Critics, however, sometimes questioned where ministry ended and business began. Jakes consistently maintained that these ventures were separate from church offerings, emphasizing entrepreneurship as a tool for broader impact. Regardless of perspective, the scale of the operation was undeniable. It reflected a shift in how influence could be structured, less like a traditional church and more like a diversified organization, where message and brand were closely intertwined. The weight of visibility. With growth came scrutiny. Success, especially on such a visible scale, tends to invite attention, not only from supporters, but also from skeptics. The lifestyle associated with prominent leaders, large homes, tailored suits, and high-profile appearances, often becomes part of the conversation. For Jakes, this visibility was both an asset and a challenge. To followers, it symbolized achievement and blessing. To critics, it raised questions about optics and expectations for spiritual leadership. In reality, the conversation was less about specific details and more about perception. When a ministry becomes closely tied to one individual, every aspect of that individual's life can take on added meaning. This dynamic creates a delicate balance. The same visibility that amplifies influence can also magnify doubt. Over time, it becomes clear that maintaining trust requires not just leadership, but careful navigation of how that leadership is seen and understood. The challenge of conflicting claims. In recent years, various claims and counterclaims have surfaced in public discussions. It's important to approach such situations with care and clarity. Allegations, especially those not fully substantiated, can quickly shape public perception even before legal processes unfold. In this case, responses included firm denials and legal action, framing the situation as a dispute requiring formal resolution. Over time, developments within the legal process raised additional questions about credibility and evidence, adding complexity to an already sensitive situation. For observers, the details can become difficult to follow, and opinions often form based on partial information. This highlights a broader issue. In the digital era, the pace of judgment often outstrips the pace of verification. For institutions tied closely to individuals, these moments are particularly challenging, as the outcome affects not just personal reputation, but the stability of the wider community connected to it. A moment of human vulnerability. Beyond public narratives, there are moments that remind everyone of the human side of leadership. During a live service, when Jakes experienced a serious health crisis later revealed to be a heart attack, the focus shifted dramatically. In that instant, titles and influence gave way to concern for a person's well-being. For the congregation, it was a sobering experience, one that underscored the reality that even the most prominent figures are not immune to physical limits. Leadership often carries an expectation of strength and continuity, but moments like these reveal the importance of succession and support. They also prompt reflection within communities about what truly sustains them. Is it a single voice or a shared foundation? These questions, while difficult, are necessary for long-term resilience. They move the conversation beyond personality and toward structure. Passing the mantle forward. When the time came for transition, the decision to pass leadership to Sarah Jakes Roberts and Touré Roberts marked a new chapter. Succession in any large organization is complex, but in faith communities, it carries additional emotional weight. Members are not just adjusting to new leadership styles, they are navigating a shift in identity. For some, the transition felt natural, a continuation of a shared vision. For others, it raised questions about continuity and change. Attendance patterns, engagement levels, and overall momentum all become indicators of how successfully a transition is unfolding. Yet, numbers alone do not capture the full picture. What matters equally is whether the core message continues to resonate and whether the community feels connected to its new leaders. In many ways, this phase is less about replacing one voice and more about redefining how that voice is expressed. A broader shift in faith communities. The changes at the Potter's House reflect a wider trend across the United States. Studies by organizations like Pew Research Center show declining church attendance and shifting attitudes toward organized religion. These patterns began before recent events and have been influenced by cultural, social, and generational changes. The pandemic accelerated some of these shifts, prompting many to rethink how they engage with faith. For megachurches, the impact is particularly noticeable. Structures built for large gatherings now face the challenge of maintaining relevance in a more decentralized landscape. This doesn't necessarily signal the end of such institutions, but it does suggest a period of adaptation. Communities are exploring new ways to connect, often blending traditional practices with digital engagement. The question is no longer just how to gather people, but how to sustain meaning in changing times. The fragility of influence. What this story ultimately reveals is the delicate nature of influence when it is closely tied to a single individual. Charismatic leadership can build something extraordinary, but it can also create vulnerability. When trust is centered on one figure, any challenge to that figure can ripple outward. Scholars and observers have long noted this dynamic, emphasizing the importance of shared leadership and institutional resilience. The idea is not to diminish the role of strong leaders, but to recognize the need for balance. Sustainable systems are those that can endure beyond any one person. For the Potter's House, this moment represents both a challenge and an opportunity to evolve from a personality-driven model into something more distributed and enduring. Whether that transition succeeds will depend on how well the community adapts and how clearly it defines its purpose moving forward. What comes next? Looking ahead, the future of the Potter's House and similar institutions will likely be shaped by a combination of tradition and reinvention. The foundation built over decades still holds value, but its expression may need to change. Leadership transitions, evolving community expectations, and the realities of the digital age all play a role. For followers, the question is less about any single event and more about continuity of purpose. For observers, it's a case study in how modern influence operates, how it rises, how it's tested, and how it adapts. Ultimately, the story is still unfolding. Institutions rooted in faith have a unique capacity for renewal, drawing on both belief and community. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a period of rebuilding will depend on choices made in the present. What remains certain is that the conversation about leadership, trust, and resilience is far from over.